All right, here we go. We're back.
Back again.
Yeah, it's been a little bit. It's good to sit down at the table with you guys. This, just right off the bat, this episode was inspired by our buddy David Skolnick out in Arizona, physical therapist and power lifter. I love that guy. I think he puts out some pretty good content. Go follow him on Instagram. He's great. I wish he was here,
Yeah.
or I wish we were in Arizona. One of the other ways, because I would hang out with David a lot, and I would certainly refer clients over to him. He's got a really good way. A smart business guy, super sharp, super articulate. And the other guy that we follow and I listen to quite frequently, because I think he puts out really good information, and he does it, I think, with a good amount of integrity. And I think that's so hard to find these days, like with regard to agendas and how Instagram or social media works and whatnot. That's Lane Norton.
Yep.
Bio Lane. I really like Lane. I think he does a really great job. And he's certainly, like, I've watched him evolve over the years from where he started. He was pretty hot, a lot of hot takes and whatnot. And he's still got his hot takes, but they're very much rooted in research and science. He's got a PhD. He's kind of a nerd. And I love that about him. And these guys were talking about reps and sets, what really builds strength, and sort of the controversy or the what builds strength in muscle. And there's always this back and forth, and there's anything that kind of gets attention is going to get blown way out of proportion. It creates confusion. People will choose sides in camps, and both those guys really brought this back in a couple of posts that I saw them kind of put up in some videos with regard to basically the repetition continuum. What's really the truth behind building strength and hypertrophy? And this comes down to a lot of things. But again, going back to the research part, there's another guy who I really love, and I've liked this. This guy's been around since I first started. His name's Brad Schoenfeld.
Yep.
Another really smart guy who probably is one of the more, is at least in recent history, he's probably one of the more published authors of peer-reviewed studies out there. And he works with a group of dudes that are people. Sorry, there's men and women there that do a really good job at doing their own very specific studies, as well as meta-analysis. And so he published this paper back in 2021. I think it was really interesting. I remember reading it then, and David actually brought it to this post, and I was like, I should go back and read that and kind of see where we were then versus where we are now, which wasn't too long ago. But it called into question quite a few things, and I like that about Schoenfeld and what he does. He's like, well, let's look at this a little bit deeper. And so that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about, and maybe clear some things up with people or for people about like rep and set schemes. This really, I think we just did a podcast before any of this came up on intensity and effort. In the definition of intensity and how it can be looked at in a couple of different ways. So if you're listening to this and you haven't listened to that one, go back to the last episode where we kind of dig into that, because that has a lot to do with what we're about to talk about right now. And while you're doing that, I'm going to adjust this camera.
Yeah. Thanks, Drew. I as you're talking, and a lot of both of those, Lane and David that we were talking about, a lot of their takes, I think online there's a lot of things that there's a lot of confusion about what's important and what really matters for things like muscle growth, strength, general fitness, longevity. And it's interesting because I think around this conversation, there's both a lot of things. In a lot of ways, training and exercising is very simple, but in a lot of ways, training and exercising is also very complex. And I think a lot of what happens is when you provide these more nuanced topics, especially on the like quick viral videos that kind of blow up, I think they can build a lot of confusion, and I think they pull a lot of the general population's focus away from what matters. Yep. But on the other side of things, I do think there are some people who also it's kind of viral to say, oh, just lift and, it doesn't really matter, just go in. And they try to oversimplify things, where it is very complicated in certain aspects, but really it's more how you're applying these concepts. So even things around rep schemes, around exercise selection, all these things, it's not that there's these magic exercises or reps, it's how are you applying to them and what does it make sense? Yep. So even, yes, you can at this point, we have seen things like we're going to talk about, like you can build muscle and strength at a wide variety of rep ranges, but with something we're also discussing off air is sometimes there, yes, you can build muscle at 5 reps. Yes, you can build muscle at 30 reps is even up we're seeing, but what does it make sense for that exercise, and what does it make sense for that individual? What does it make sense for, when we're talking about a specific exercise, like the quality of that exercise? Is this exercise a highly skilled exercise? So if it's a very high skill demand movement, does doing 30 reps make sense? Are they going to have good quality movement to be able to get proximity to failure? Things like that I think provide a lot of confusion. And really what it is there's less solid hard truths than a lot of people really think there are. There's a lot of what's the application? How are you applying this to the individual at that current time? Yeah. And that's where I think a skilled coach or someone who has their head wrapped around this a little bit more is how do they apply these things for that specific individual?
You said something earlier about it being complicated, and I don't know if it's complicated. I think it's more just complex, and I think that's probably what you meant is complex.
What you meant to say.
Yeah, I like it. No, I do it. I love it. Yeah.
But, the other thing is too, we were talking about it all depends. It depends on the person. It depends on the history. It depends on the exercise. And, the other thing that's out there too, as far as when we talk about Instagram, is the fact that, people, there's confusion, but then also I think when it comes to the various trainers, and I say trainers and not coaches, trainers in box gyms, and I don't want to bash it, but at the same time, I probably am a little bit.
Or online.
Yeah. There's a lot of trainers who are only an online trainer.
I mean, the barrier for entry to become a trainer is so low.
It's the lowest.
And so then I think that adds to the confusion as far as people on social media that call themselves a trainer, and it makes it more. You're having to sift through all the information. It becomes challenging.
At risk of bashing it, I think there's truth in what you said. So it's like, it may sound like bashing, but it is very true. And that's something that the profession of coaching / training has been plagued with and will continue to be plagued with, is that the barrier of entry is very low. You put, I'm a trainer in your Instagram bio and you're a trainer, post some content and it starts to go. And if you start to understand how algorithms work and what's the sexy content and what drives the traffic and whatever, you can actually make a living on it. And a lot of people make a very good living on it, to the extent now that you're being told as a trainer, if you're not making 10 to 50 grand a month, you're a loser and you're not doing it right. And again, that just perpetuates the cycle of the low barrier of entry. Like, well, anybody can do this. If these guys are making 100 grand or 50 grand a month or whatever, why can't I do that too? And it's America. It's a free market. And that allows both the purchaser or the consumer of this material or this service, if you will, and the provider to do kind of whatever they want. It's a challenge, but that said, in that comes like the experiential part. There's a background knowledge part. And I'm not saying you have to be like, what should the qualification be? I don't want to take this too far down a tangent, but what should the qualification be? There's never going to be agreements on this. And there are people out there are camps out there that have tried to do this before and failed at it miserably, because it ends up turning into a boys club or a gate kept type of thing. And we've seen some people be very successful at the gatekeeping side of things, but all of that combined ends up adding to the confusion, I think, or the misguidance that people have. And now in the age of information, kind of where we're at, I can't believe I'm even still calling it that. That just kind of dates me. Like there's just so much being thrown out at people on the daily, and I think they're having a tough time wading through it. And so going back to the complexity versus complicated part, people search for the easy button. Like what's the easiest thing to do? And I think, when we kind of refer back to this repetition continuum, there is a lot of value in it, because it is kind of easy. Like when we think about this, so let's talk about the repetition continuum. So that being like, hey, if you want to build strength, it's like 1 to 5 reps, right? If you want to build hypertrophy, it's like 8 to 12 reps, right? Muscle building. And if you want to build endurance, it's 15 plus reps. And there's some truth in that. But going back to how you opened up, Ryan, there's a lot of things that are getting left out of that particular variable, and that is just reps, right? We've talked about how many reps and sets to build muscle, and had that conversation probably several times on the show at this point. But there's nuance in there, and then there's, more importantly, there is the individual that you're working with, right? And what's appropriate for them, and that's where things get really muddy. And that's where I think people are looking for answers, they're looking for solutions, and they get caught up in the being fed the same things and hearing the same things. And then it's kind of like an all or nothing type of thing. Well, I only do 8 to 12. Well, I only do 1 to 5, right? And I've seen great hypertrophy and strength gains on 1 to 5. It's very possible. And of course that's going to work, right? If you're building strength, you're likely building some hypertrophy, at least for a while. If you're building muscle, you are building strength. Mm-hmm. Those things absolutely correlate to one another. And on the endurance side, like on the 15 plus reps, you just said it, like you can build strength and hypertrophy with up to 30 reps. So this is where things get a little weird.
Well, it's interesting because I think there's a lot of people who, when more has come out about basically saying that the specific reps continuum and, being very categorized as this, attributes to this adaptation, this attributes to that adaptation. And it's very separated and very strict of, well, if you're doing this, if you're doing sets of 25, you're not going to build any strength, or if you're doing low sets, you're not going to build any hypertrophy, and then endurance, and then hypertrophy, obviously kind of being that continuum through all three. Really, for me, I've kind of found, and for me, it was kind of when this initially came out, with my training of being really taught this as a trainer years ago. At first it kind of called like some of my beliefs of like, oh, wait, what? Mm-hmm. Like there's lots of different ways I can do this. The ways that I always had to, hey, we're in a strength block right now in this periodization. I'm going to only make you do 5s or whatever the current intention was. Even over the last year or two, it's kind of actually brought me some almost comfort knowing that there's lots of ways to skin the cat, or what was what you said? Lots of ways to peel a potato was one that you said a couple episodes ago. I think I never heard that one. Lots of ways to do things that you don't have to be so married to a specific thing to get a specific adaptation. I do think there is still, like, on the high end of performance, like if you are a power lifter, and we can get more into this conversation of, yes, to build max strength, you do need to work at a high, heavy load, and that to be able to work with a high enough load, that's going to be a few reps that you can do, relatively speaking. And then there's also the skill component of that specific skill, of a very specific adaptation to perform the barbell back squat for 1 rep in that competition, the specificity. But generally speaking, for a majority of people who are simply exercising to general goals, right? I just want to be a little stronger. I want a little bit more muscle. I want a better longevity. I want some endurance. There's lots of different ways that you can go about these things. And I think one of the reasons I actually really like this too is the biggest success is in any kind of exercise program is going to come from buy-in and effort, right? So the psychology, right? Buy-in and effort to the program, and effort of the psychology of also doing what that individual relatively enjoys, right? Relatively enjoys. And it might even be in the grand scheme, but it might even be currently. So like for me, when you've been training for a long time, I'm sure you the same way, when you've been training for a long time, getting something that's novel and stimulus and something that's new and exciting in your training, even if it is just training reps,
very hard.
It's very hard to still find that. So, but knowing that, like, okay, I want to get stronger. If I had to always do a 5x5 on back squats, like at a certain point, I'm going to get really sick of that. But knowing that I can, do different squat variations, do different rep ranges, and still kind of move the needle forward, even if that is not the maximal intent for that strength adaptation or whatever for that specific skill, I'm still moving the needle forward and I'm getting higher effort and buy-in because the psychology of enjoyment and novel and all those different things that really matter.
That's those are all very good points. You touched on a couple of things here that I think come up in a little bit, but I want to circle it back or reverse rewind here for a second and go back to kind of your history and kind of the history of this continuum and like where those early belief systems came from. And a lot of times that comes from experience, right? Like this is what worked for me. And again, I think that's where most people go. If they've worked out before, they're starting their program again, or they've been doing it for a long time, they tend to stick to what has worked for them. And I don't think that's a bad thing. However, at some point it might stop, and everybody that's done this for a long enough period will recognize like they'll hit these periods, and it's often referred to as a plateau where they're not making the gains or the changes that they want to. And the question in that should be like, not what am I doing wrong, but what could I be doing a little bit differently, right? And then again, we start reaching for things, and it's in a piece of equipment, or it's this new exercise that somebody's talking or everybody's talking about now or whatever else, or it's this new rep scheme or set scheme or RPE versus RIR and those kind of things. But this goes back to like some early research, like back in the 40s and 50s, where it was basically found that, you lift heavier loads, you get bigger and stronger, and you lift lighter loads, you build endurance. That's the basic premise of some of this work that got done. And then that continuum basically became accepted. Why? Because it worked, right? Like people started to find, but it wasn't necessarily, again, like lighter weights just built endurance and heavier weights just built strength. Heavier weights will build endurance. Lighter weights will build strength as well. But things probably weren't as well understood as they are now, right? As science has evolved and studies have evolved and more people are now lifting weights and training, and there's more subject matter to study and all the things that are happening now in the world and will continue to happen, and we'll continue to learn new things. The reality of it is that when you get to the root of it all, it still is pretty basic. It's uncomplicated, but it does move into the effort piece and what am I doing, and then so how am I doing what I'm doing? The other part of this is it was really easy to adopt. Like it just made sense. Like 8 to 12, okay, we do 8 to 12 and we get bigger and stronger, right? The 1 to 5, we see these Herculean efforts. You guys got the guys in the sideshows that are doing these crazy lifts or whatever with odd objects or kettlebells or barbells or whatever they were doing back in the 40s and 50s. And again, it continues to evolve, but it was really easy to adopt.
I was going to say the repetition continuum. I mean, if you think about, you're talking about easy to adopt, but it provides a structure. And then if you take it back to academia and what you're teaching students in weightlifting classes, or you're teaching future teachers for, PE, or you're teaching young professionals that are going into physical therapy or athletic training or in rehab sciences and whatnot. It provides structure. Yep. And that structure then is easy to replicate and teach and test. And test.
So you can research it. Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, if you were to tell somebody some of the things that we're going to be talking about, it depends on the person in front of you. It depends on the person's exercise history.
People don't want to hear that.
Yeah. Well, it leaves too much gray area. And so then it's like, well, wait, what do you mean that I can get hypertrophy with, 6 repetitions when, you say it's supposed to be 8 to 12 or 10 to 12, So I think it gives structure, and the structure is then able to be repeated to students to be able then to carry on and then test. Yes.
Yeah, and I think there is negatives to that structure, but there's a lot of positives to having some sort of base to build off of in structure. And I like the idea that like you have to know the rules before you can break them, right? So when you're teaching the person who has never become a coach, and you're first becoming a coach, there's a lot to wrap your head around when you're first becoming a personal trainer, right? And you're trying to like, I have to program these workouts. I'm just going to program the things that I always do, things like that. But when you start to have some sort of structure base to build this around, and you're going to find some success there. And then with the experience and with understanding nuance, that's where you can start to kind of bend these rules that really we're seeing aren't really rules. But I do still think there is some merit to having an idea of a structure base in your head initially.
Yeah. And again, the structure is helpful for getting somebody to be consistent, right? Mm-hmm. If you keep it simple, that's almost always better, particularly for the new coach. Like, let's not try to get too complicated or too wild here. Let's just do the basic things that we know. And what we know basically is greater than 60% of like your 1 RM, which is usually like the gold standard for measuring like what your max is, your 1 rep maximum. And then percentages are based off of that. Again, going back to this greater than 60. Is going to build some strength and hypertrophy, right? And less than that, and we're not getting the same type of adaptation, or not getting it at the same rate. We're not getting the same rate of adaptation.
Yeah, and I mean, I apply this a lot to my clients. So something that I am I'm very consistent with is if I have a client who's a little bit newer to exercising and they're still just trying to wrap their head around on movement and technique and general intention for exercises and how to brace and all these different things. A lot of my newer clients, I still do really program like, all right, you're going to be hitting a 3x8 today. And this is the weight I've set up for you. And I want you to hit 8 reps, because it takes away a lot of the anxiety and the confusion around the possibilities around that exercise of like, so it gives them that structure of, okay, I just had to hit this for 8. Now I can just focus on my bracing, and that's what I'm doing. Where when I start to get someone more advanced, like we know that really it doesn't matter necessarily as much as we thought of hitting 8. What really matters is tension, effort, and proximity to failure, right? So long term is like I see that person's wrapping their head around exercise in general, exercise that specifically. Hey, we've been back squatting or whatever kind of exercise for a little while. Then I will kind of push that intention. Well, I really want more in this range, or well, I really just want you to go until it's closer to failure. But it's kind of that same structure for me, I think, as the newer coach, needing that structure as you're kind of wrapping your head around things. That's how I go a lot about with a lot of my newer clients who, again, I'm just wanting them to wrap around how to even do these mechanics and slowly progress and get better. And so I do give specific reps that I want them to hit. And then long term, I start to kind of blend things together a little bit more. And I kind of just focus on pushing an effort and have general goals ranges, like a target, like a compass, and less or more of a compass and less of a target.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of looking at it. And I think what you did was you just going to foreshadow a few things we're going to talk about here, but the specificity is going to be the driver here, right? And just with regard to what it is that we're trying to get. So if we're trying to build strength, I'm not saying we're trying to build strength in the barbell back squat as an example. Mm-hmm. If I want to build strength in the barbell back squat, then I need to do the barbell back squat. There's a skill involved there. There's a skill in doing that. And then obviously if I want to lift heavier loads, I have to train heavy, right? Those are basic principles that you don't want to violate. At the same time, like I can improve my bench or my barbell back squat by doing other exercises that will then have transference over to the barbell back squat. And I think that's where people get lost. So, and part of that is like they get lost very easily because they get married to an exercise like this. And this goes back to like the testing, like there's metrics around like how much you should be able to squat if you do this thing, or, you know, how much you should be able to deadlift or how much you should be able to bench press. And those are, I don't want to say they're dangerous, but this goes back to the compass versus the target, right? And so now we're targeting these very specific movements and the strength that we have in these very specific movements as the measurement for total strength. So one of the things that David interestingly pointed out about this particular study was like, look, if you're measuring strength through the back squat, then obviously you need to be doing the back squat. But if you're just measuring strength, and more specifically, if you took the back squat out of it and you were just the movement out of it and you were just measuring isometric strength, as it turns out, like the back squat doesn't really matter because again, that's very specific to a very specific movement. But when you look at quad strength, hamstring strength, glute strength, back strength, whatever, isometrically, you don't have to do the back squat to continue to build that, and you can be just as strong or stronger. It just might not show up for you in the test, which is the back squat. Well,
and you said this, maybe it was off air, but I think kind of even go back, it's not that the back squat doesn't matter in the fact that the back squat still can really improve that isometric strength,
100%.
But it doesn't matter in the aspect of, but you can still improve that isometric strength lots of other ways.
Yes.
So it's not that the back squat is still a great way to do that, but it's not specific or isolated to just the back squat for something like that. So
and so we get back like, okay, so what if, going back to the specificity of the person we're working with, like what are they limited by, right? And so if they have limitations, they have orthopedic limitations. They have maybe some mental blocks. There could be things.
Or if they're new to weight training,
they do not have the skill.
Quality issues.
They have a skill issue. They have a tissue quality issue. Like spending an entire session trying to get somebody to do a barbell back squat perfectly, it could be, I guess, compared to a waste of time if we're not properly loading them to build the strength that they came to us for in the first place. I would love everybody to do a barbell back squat. And ideally, I'm going to have most people do that or perform that at some level, but it's not necessarily going to be my primary movement ever, right? Maybe it is for some, maybe it isn't for others. Again, that's the depends thing there. And if you're in a program and there's no barbell back squatting, you immediately go, well, this program's a piece of shit because there's no barbell back squatting in it. Like, what kind of program is this anyways? Right? That's the disconnect that I see people having. You can build strength with a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. And again, that's the depends piece. And then we go back to reps, total reps, and what we're building and how we're doing it. But again, I think the basics though, with you're going to have to progressively overload, you're going to have to add more weight to something in order to get something out of it, right? Get some adaptation out of it, which again, I think just in the end, just supports what we see with trained lifters. Like they continue to add weights, right? They continue to add intensity or to match that intensity to the loads that they're using, and they continue to get stronger and bigger. There's no argument here on that.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because I think this is a lot in the Fit for Action program, and even on a program that I'm running independently. So we talk about this for the person learning of, hey, I'm just trying to increase your strength, but maybe you're not ready for the barbell back squat. So I'm going to have a different squat variation or whatever. But for me, even as an individual, it's interesting. My program that I'm on right now, every 4 weeks, it's really changing even the primary like strength exercise, even for lower body, let's say a squat focus or a hinge focus or whatever it is. It's different modalities every 4 weeks. And it's interesting. I actually hadn't back squatted in, I think, maybe almost a year, maybe. And I was able, but I've been improving and pushing on my strength and other things in lots of different exercises that are not, I've been doing different front squats or different lunges for different things and pushing the intensity there and trying to progress on those. And then my first time back squatting, I was still back squatting a relatively load that was close to what I was doing when there was a little bit of getting the kinks of the skill of the back squat, but my performance, I didn't have to go back to square one. Oh, I haven't back squatted in a year. I have to do 135 today. Like I still was able to push it over 300 pounds for my squat that I haven't done in a long time. So I think even for you, the more you have in your tool belt, so there's kind of, again, the novice we were talking about of who's learning what's the right appropriate exercise. But then for the more experienced person, for you, when you have a very big tool belt and you feel very like you're an expert in each of these tools, you can plug and play them and they still show improvement for each other. So do you want to do a block where you're really pushing a unilateral exercise for your lower body quad dominant exercise? Like you're going to really push your Bulgarian split squats for a while. You can do that and still push the needle forward, right? You can have a block where my primary is a front squat. My primary is a back squat. I don't feel like front squatting right now. It doesn't fit for my time commitment or my equipment commitment or I just don't fucking want to do it. It's boring to me right now. And you can still push the needle forward in all these different ways. And that is very closely tied to the rep scheme conversation around what the reps really make sense for specific exercises. Like for me at this point, I could do lunges I can find doing lunges for high reps. I don't mind doing a set of 20 lunges, right? But if you told me to do a set of 20 back squats, I hate that. That makes me want to barf. I'm not going to do that. So it's also how do you apply for the specific exercise that feels like something you can push and have high intensity and high proximity to failure. And there's lots of different ways to do it. So,
yeah. Again, just kind of circling it back to like kind of what the evidence has showed us. Yes. And this is where things get confusing because there's a lot of research out there and a lot of things, but at the end, there's dozens of studies, right? Dozens of studies on this stuff with regard to reps and sets and loads. And there's really no meaningful difference in hypertrophy between like heavy, medium, and lower resistance, right? There isn't. Like you can get the same adaptations.
Hypertrophy,
yeah. Hypertrophy, specific to hypertrophy with the light, medium, heavy loads. And again, that's the part that I think people get confused by, but that's when you already kind of covered it with like, well, what makes sense for this client, right? What makes sense for me if I'm doing this workout? The other thing is like, there's tons of studies out there where that 8 to 12 repetition range gets used and it shows great results. So that evidence also is there. So again, we've seen the light, medium, and heavy, right? And we've also seen like the 8 to 12, right? And then what was that? Was that light, medium, or heavy? Well, it's going to be medium to heavy weights is where we're going to be there. And again, heavy is relative. It's relative to the max, the 1 RM that person is capable of doing under the skill that's required by that particular movement they're using, whatever's being tested, whatever's being researched, right? And then also whatever effort level they're putting into it, like what's the intention that they're actually using while they're going through there. So again, there's a lot of there. I think at the end of the day, there's like no hypertrophy zone though. There isn't. Like the hypertrophy can be
like a golden, like it is between this and this.
There 100% is not. There just isn't. There's no research that's going to support that. In fact, it says the opposite. Yeah. So there is no like, you will not build muscle, right, in less than 8 or more than 12 repetitions. So if we're clearing the air on anything, that's it. So if you did 13 repetitions today, or you did 7 repetitions today, that does not mean you did not and cannot build muscle doing that. So again, but there are people that are very religiously like, I do this rep range all the time because going back, it's convenient, it's easily adopted, it provides me good structure and whatever. And you can keep doing that. You could keep doing that. And as long as you are managing those other variables, which again, we covered in depth on this other podcast, which is the skill, right? The effort, the intensity in terms of the loading that you use, and the consistency at which you're doing those things. Rest times are also included, right? The other variables, nutrition, sleep, or recovery, those kind of things are all included there. So again, just kind of putting a blanket statement out there, there's no such thing as the hypertrophy zone. Just doesn't exist. It's like there's no such thing as the fat burning zone.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, almost to push back is we know that there is no such thing as the hypertrophy zone. And I think that there's really good benefit to understanding that. But to kind of go back to does it make sense? And I think that's where a lot of times to look at these studies and look at the data around any sort of training principle or nutrition principle as well. Does it make sense for that specific thing? So I think also, do I still program 6 to 12 or 8 to 12 a lot? I do, because certain exercises or certain times, it does still make sense. I can build muscle in 5 reps, but we talk about this a lot of times, like in our group classes, a lot of times when we lower them down to 5 reps, they're not able to really be comfortable to push a heavy enough load to actually get the hypertrophy stimulus from 5 reps, right? And on the other side of things, can they build muscle with a set of 20? Yes, they can. But when we program that, a lot of times they might be going too light still for that load, or it just sucks and their movement quality is terrible. So a lot of times it is still beneficial to kind of go from that 6 or 8 to 12 rep range, because it's kind of like you said, it's convenient. It's in that middle spot where you're working with a pretty heavy load. You're going to still, it's a little bit easier to find that target where it's not maximal load, where it's super intimidating just to hold it in your hands if you're benching or whatever. But it's also, you're not going to be doing this set it's not going to take you a minute and a half to get through this set either. So there still is, and it kind of goes back to like when there is something data coming out of, there is no hypertrophy zone, but also where's the nuances that I experience as a coach to how do you apply this for that? So, yeah.
So you, again, going back to like high reps, right, require, if you're going to do the high reps thing, what's the outcome of this? Like, well, first off, there's going to be a higher pain response. There's going to be burning. Your heart rate is going to get up more, right? You're going to need more grit in order to be able to get through that, right? And
assuming you're using the appropriate load.
Assuming again, the variables are in line, right? All the things we've already talked about, not worth repeating here. But what does that often equate to? Low adherence.
Yeah.
People just not getting through it. So if you're choosing high reps, like you need to stay with those high reps. And if you can do that and stay with it, then knock yourself out. Keep doing that. But the reason we're not choosing that for most clients is they will not do it, right? They will not complete the set. They will not have that grit, that intestinal fortitude. They will not be able to deal with that discomfort in order to get through there to achieve the adaptation that we're trying to get. From the medium or from the heavy loads perspective, when you look at that, well, that's going to require more, it demands, there's a higher stress response, right? At a lot of levels. On the CNS, right? Again, heart rate gets up, like it's heavy. There's that whole feeling of, holy shit, this is a lot of weight. This is heavy, which requires a certain mental and intestinal fortitude to get through. It also it's creating more mechanical stress, right? Because more mechanical stress and tension. And that also, when you look at how that starts to play into things, you're starting to look at like what's happening with the joints. Like, does somebody have the joint integrity, the tissue quality, tissue integrity in order to maintain that? And that can be a problem. Again, then getting back to the moderate loads, or we're looking at that 6 to 12 repetition, this seems to kind of be the sweet spot, which is what most people tend to drift to because it works. It's also time efficient. It's effort efficient with regard to like a tolerance level. And then lastly, you can get good volume with this, right? A total volume, which is an important factor in terms of getting these gains over time. So the 8 to 12 rule isn't like a magic rule. It works, but more specifically, it's convenient and it's, I dare say, comfortable for people to work in. They can get through that, right? Making it probably a better choice for most. And hopefully the takeaway at the end of this is we'll give you some at the end here, just with regard to how we may program different rep and set schemes for different things in everybody's workout. Because I think one of the most valuable things you can do is play around with many of these, right? And all of these to get the benefits that they all provide. But the last time is the last thing, or maybe one of the other things, not the last thing to get into, is like fiber types, right? This type 1 versus type 2 fibers. So let's talk a little bit about, let's cover the high level stuff on type 1 and type 2 fibers. What do you want to say about that without getting into the rabbit hole on this with regard to type 1 versus type 2?
Well, I think a common is slow twitch and fast twitch. Yep. A lot of people hear that. And so type 1 is slow twitch. That's more a lot of times thought as like your endurance, right? Yeah. And type 2 is more like your fast twitch, your explosive, your quick contraction. But kind of what we're talking about too is, these rep schemes not being specific to these fiber types is, yes, to a repeated contraction is going to be often type 1, right? If you're going to be on the bike for an hour, there's going to be a lot of type 1 contraction. On the other side of things, if you're doing a 1 rep max squat, a type 2 fibers, there's going to be a lot of high contraction there. But really a way to think about it is it's not a yes and no activation of type 1 or type 2. It's more of an on-ramping of type 1 into type 2 fibers.
Yeah, it's like a need or need not to.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So basically the way to think about it is that motor unit is going to start to switch on for those specific type of muscle fibers based on the demand of the stimulus you're giving it. So if you're trying to pick up something and you can't pick it up with your type 1 fibers, if you can kind of imagine that way, your body's going to go, oh, we need to turn on some of these higher output, higher fatiguing, quicker to exhaustion muscle fibers, type 2 fibers, which are going to allow me to get enough, muscular recruitment to pick up this, deadlift or whatever it is. But kind of how this relates to this structure is we know that hypertrophy is a lot based on proximity to failure, which we've talked about a lot. And the thing is, even if you are doing that high set of 30, which yes, we think that's an endurance-based set, that's going to be more of a type 1 fiber contraction because it's that lower, it has a higher capacity for contraction, or it has a higher, capacity tolerance for contraction, repeated contractions without fatiguing as quickly. But if I'm still, in theory, getting to that level of fatigue, proximity to failure with high mechanical tension, even in that set of 20, you're still going to eventually turn on those type 2 muscle fibers. And there's going to be a fatigue for that muscle fiber as well.
Yeah. So I think that the takeaway is if you want to ensure like all your fibers are getting hit, right? Yeah. If that's at the end of this, like I heard everything you said there, I just want to make sure I'm doing it right. Yeah. Right. Then here's what you do. You just train hard, yes. Right? Like again, which is relative. You take sets very close to failure, right? We know that to be somewhere probably around 1 to 3 RIR. We often program the 2 RIR in a lot of our stuff. We talked a little bit about the reasons why and what that means for people and how people are often under predicting what their 2 RIR is, which is an important thing here, which is going back to you were mentioning the program that you're doing in FFA, the Fit for Action program, is a lot of that is 2 RIR, and talked about like the blocks and the amount of time we spend in something. You're saying I'm changing stuff up every 4 weeks, right? We're going about every 6 to 7 weeks in FFA because as we change into a new block and we change exercise selection, I want to give people a couple of rounds through those first couple of weeks because they're repeating these workouts over those first couple of weeks so that they can figure this out for themselves. Like what actually is my 2 hours? This is my first day doing a Zercher squat. I've not done this before. So I'm not exactly sure. And I need to have I need to get practice doing this.
A couple under your belt.
Yeah.
Right?
So we start to stretch the block out a little further. I mean, you can go as many as 10 or 12 weeks if you wanted, but I like that 6 weeks for a couple of reasons. One, it keeps it interesting, right? 2, we're constantly varying it, right? And when I say constantly, every 6 to 7 weeks, we're testing and then we're changing it up, right? We're testing to see that our strength is getting better, and then we revisit stuff, right? We come back to see how that change in exercise selection that we utilized and the practice that we put into that then transfers over to maybe some of the more the stuff that we started with, i.e. the barbell back squat, which is not in block 2, right? I've taken it out. People freaking out a little bit like, whoa. Like what, I'm not on leg day, right? On that up and on that lower focus day, I'm not doing a back squat anymore. Yeah, but you're challenging the same muscle groups. You're just doing it in a different way with the Zercher squat. So point there. Sorry, without getting onto a tangent about the Fit for Action program, it's train hard, take your sets as close to failure, and regardless of the load that you're using, right? So going back to the 30 reps, yes, you'll build it, but you have to take it too close to failure, and that gets harder to predict the more reps you are doing, right? That wiggle room starts to disappear, right? Like, well, okay, last time I was able to get to 30. This time, maybe, I got 30 and I wasn't quite there, right? And this time I'm going to up the weight a little bit. Am I there? Am I getting close at 16? Am I getting close at 20? Not really there yet at 25. And now I've done 55 repetitions and I still haven't hit failure yet. This is where the nuance in that comes in, and where the not taking it to failure will have a dramatic effect on whether or not you're getting the adaptation that you need or want.
So we talk about in our group classes, we still a lot of times will program prescribed reps because you kind of have to in a group format. We're telling them what to do. And so we're in a strength block right now where we are trying to handle heavier loads, and we're doing sets of 5. And, we're wanting people to take this proximity to failure so that they're getting a good intention, they're getting a good adaptation. And today on all their sets for both their exercises, their primary strengths, we had sumo deadlifts, and then we had barbell flat bench. And I said, for all of you on your last set, I want you to go to as many reps as you can. I want you to go to failure. Right?
Yep.
I had several people who this is what I was hitting for 5 on their set 2, and they thought it was hard. Several people who hit their last set and they hit it for 12 reps, hit it for 13 reps. So that's a great example of like, yes, there is like, hey, we have this goal of hitting 5 reps, but you actually have to be working hard enough to get proximity to failure. And I told them, you have 7 reps or 5 if you're doing 2 RIR or whatever, but you have 7 reps left of gains on the, you left that on the table that you weren't stimulating in that other set. And so, I think that's where it's hard to find within the different rep ranges of, are you actually stimulating that close to that proximity to failure? Are you actually working hard? I think a lot of people will gravitate to, I like lifting heavy or I like lifting light for more reps. But really at the end of the day, if you do gravitate towards that, even if you are thinking about it like, this is where people have kind of gotten confused with fiber types in the past. There are people who have more type 1, there are people who have more type 2, so they're going to gravitate. But at the end of the day, are you just kind of bitching out?
Yeah.
Are you also just not working hard enough? So I think there's a lot of people who think that the 5s, when we program that, are easy. And they think that like, cool. And I literally heard someone say it today. It's easier. So it's a bigger break. And I said, okay, you're just bitching out because you're only doing 5 reps of, what's 60% of your 1RM when it should be 90 or 85%. You should feel exhausted.
Yep. So, on that conversation, so I had a coaching conversation with one of our junior coaches today, and he's working with this individual, and she has been coming in for open gym very regularly, probably, majority of a year. And when she's in here, she looks like she's working hard for her, but we've all sat here and we've talked about her, and we know she can work way harder. She just doesn't know it.
Yeah.
And so, we've been watching her, and we've all, had conversations with her, and she finally ended up, I'm going to go ahead and invest in some personal training. So she purchased some personal training, and she's been meeting with this coach of ours probably for, 3 or 4 sessions now. And I had a conversation with him today. I said, so how's she doing? He's like, yeah, she's coming along. And I said, so, have you worked with her on going to failure yet for any of her lifts? And he's like, no. And I said, you know what? I encourage you to take her to failure on, 1 or 2 lifts so she knows what it is. So you, as her coach, also know what her capacity is, because I still don't think that she is working to her optimal level that she has. No,
because she's a fit person. She does a lot. She does a lot of different things outside of the gym. So you can tell that she's generally fit. She's strong. I promise you, seeing her even with him, and he's pushing her more than she has, but I'm sure there's some exercises where she probably has like 10 more reps in her.
For sure. Yeah.
So
it's a tough thing as a coach. Like, so, the rule is do not harm. Right.
Yes.
And I think that's intrinsically in most people, for that matter, and including those that are training themselves individually, and they don't want to get hurt. And I think that's a valid reason to be careful or cautious, but at some level you need to, I'm not saying push caution to the wind. What I'm saying is there is going to be a time where you're going to need to test this, and you're going to need to see what you can or can't do. And then you're going to need to step back from that and evaluate, well, what was it? Was this the mind over matter thing, or was this the matter over mind thing? Like, did I get beat by what I saw sitting on the barbell on the floor before I tried to pick it up in my head? Or was it really what's on the barbell that kept me from picking that up? And so you have to test this stuff. So again, going back to the train hard, right? Lift heavy and test yourself. again, the 1 rep max is not practical for most people to do on their own, but on occasion, get a training buddy, go to the gym, and figure it out, right? And way less people actually get hurt in the gym than the world would like to make you believe.
You're way more likely to get hurt playing, basketball on the weekend.
I can count on one hand how many times I've been hurt in the gym. All the other times I've literally been hurt, more specifically,
acutely hurt,
injured, have been outside the gym. Yes. I definitely hurt my back in the gym one time on one of those T-bar rows. That was not a fun experience, and I know exactly what I did and how I did it, and I never did that again. And that was me pushing to my max effort with max loads, and there was a consequence for this because I did not have the skill in order to perform it at that level, at the level I was trying to perform it. That said, everything else, all the other baggage I have on board has come from other things. Have I exacerbated some of that stuff in the gym? Yeah, because I wasn't being smart about it, because I came back to the gym and tried to be, ego lift or whatever, go, this is what I can do, not what I should be doing, right? And took the wrong route. But the point of that is you gotta test it. So again, lift heavy, lift hard, and understand where your limits are. Moving just a couple more things on the endurance thing. I don't think a lot of people train for endurance. They don't think about training for endurance. And there's muscular endurance, there's cardiovascular, cardiorespiratory endurance. And this also goes back to mixing things up. And it's one of the great things about that CrossFit did. Again, one of their things was it's constantly varied, right? And some of the biggest, strongest, most athletic people I've ever known have been CrossFit athletes, like in CrossFit in its heyday, not what CrossFit has turned into. For those people that are like CrossFit OGs, they'll probably appreciate that statement. It is not the same as it used to be, and things have changed dramatically, but they were constantly doing different things, right? And as a result, they were also constantly building new levels of strength and muscle mass because they were doing these different things. They didn't go to the gym every week and back squat. They did a variation of some type of a squat, whether it was a full clean, right? Whether it was variations of the squat in different ways or variations of the lunge in different ways. And they continue to build endurance as well as strength and muscle. But the endurance stuff is, again, I think what's important, I think probably the big takeaway is the research is varied on this. It's not very consistent on the lighter loads provide, endurance building. But I think you have to look at like the subject matter that was studied there and where are they coming into this. The higher your training age, right? The more stimulus you have to give yourself in order to get the adaptation. So, but if you're a newbie and you're coming into this and we're training at higher repetitions and lighter loads, you're probably going to see some pretty serious endurance building in that amount of time. And what are we building? Are we building muscular endurance? Are we building cardiovascular endurance? Are we building a bit of both? And I would argue it's the latter. We're building a little bit of both. So it shows up on the research. And I think that people have kind of married themselves to that. And like, that's why the lighter loads do this.
Yeah. And I do think endurance is one of those stimuli. Stimuli. That is, a little bit more specific too, right? Like I know people who think they have really good endurance because they're a runner and then they go hop on a bike and they have no endurance on there and they're burning. Specificity for sure. I do think that endurance, just like strength we talked about earlier, like the expression of strength in a back squat is very specific to your expression in your skill in that movement. I do think there is some specificity in endurance that people don't really give it its heyday in that, or anyway, give it its dues. But on the other side, I do like the component. I do think there's a very like metabolic, like cardiorespiratory aspect of it, of dealing with waste products. And then a lot of it too is very, very psychological with endurance, is very dealing with the discomfort, dealing with the pain, and kind of knowing that you can push through that and keep going. I think that's a very big component.
It's very mental.
And it's very mental. And truthfully, I actually really struggle with endurance. I would much rather do 3 RM of a very heavy load than do an endurance thing, because I know that my mental with that, my ADD like does not want to continue with that. So that's something that I try to improve on a lot.
Yeah, but I think that's an important point that you just made there too, and that is any load can and will improve endurance.
Yep.
Right. So any load. So even if it's the 3 RM, the 1 RM, the 5 RM, whatever it is, that is all going to be building endurance. So again, it's never isolated. There's always multiple things happening at one time. So I mean, let's get off the endurance thing. Let's kind of just move into like some of the practical takeaways. Like, cause we could kind of review the 3 to 6, the 8 to 12, and the 15 plus, for the strength versus hypertrophy versus endurance thing. I think we kind of beat that up a little bit. I think in the end there, like, what's important is that there's a time and a place for all this stuff in your workout program if you're trying to build strength and hypertrophy, right? And so maybe it makes sense at the beginning of that workout when the nervous system is fresh, when the feel systems are fresh, to be hitting those lower rep ranges, like those 3 to 5 rep ranges or 3 to 6s, right? If that's where you're playing. Right? It makes sense because, now we've taxed the system, right? We're getting the maximal effort, maximal intention, maximal loading in whatever the rep and set scheme is there. And we're getting to create this adaptation. But as we move further and deeper into the workout, obviously the feel system is now going to be a bit depleted. The central nervous system is being depleted as a result. And now we are maybe almost forced into, if I want to continue to create this strength and hypertrophy adaptation, now I need to look to more of the moderate loads. Now I'm moving more into 8 to 12s and maybe even higher depending on what I'm working and maybe how isolated I'm trying to get here. Again, like as I move into, I started with back squats and at the end of my workout, I'm putting in arm curls. I'm not doing a 3x5 of arm curls at the end of my workout. And not that you couldn't do that, right? However, like if you're really putting the effort and the intention in at the beginning of that workout, you probably don't have that much gas in the tank at the end. Again, the more advanced lifter might, and they may choose to do this. But that's when you could start looking at the 12 plus repetitions for bicep curls, right? And you're still going to get the hypertrophy and strength building adaptation that you're looking for there. So as the workout flows, maybe you're going from the lower to medium to higher rep ranges as you're going through. And I think that kind of makes sense to people. Yet at the same time, we were having this argument about what are the best rep and set schemes for building muscle all the time. And again, hopefully what people are taking away here is there isn't one answer to this. There's many.
Well, and go back again, for me, it's almost like this comforting feeling knowing that, because I find a lot more enjoyment in a lot of my programs I've run over the last few years where I do, instead of saying every exercise I'm doing right now, I'm going to be doing a heavy 5 for every single exercise, and I'm going to really push that. A lot of that, it's very enjoyable to, hey, I want to lift something a little bit heavy at the start. Like you said, I'm going to hit a 3x3 or 3x5 on the back squat. And then you kind of, hey, I want to kind of do something moderate for my dumbbell chest press. Let's say you're doing full body, right? And I kind of want to get more of that mid range. And then I want to get a nasty pump. Like it feels good to get a pump when you're doing arms, right? It's hard to get a pump with 5 reps. If I want to get a good pump because that feels good, it's enjoyable. So I think this is a way to train that. Yes, there's that benefit of you're still going to get hypertrophy as long as you're training hard in all these areas, but it's also really enjoyable. It's enjoyable to get a little bit of each thing in that current program on that day that you're lifting, whatever you're hitting that day. So
yeah, in the same token, I think it's really a relief for individuals who are pressed for time, and they can, go in and they can do rep ranges of anywhere between 6 and 10. And if it's a compound exercise, to know that they're hitting multiple muscles and multiple joints. And so they don't necessarily have to then do the isolated types of movements where they're doing more, higher rep ranges.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. So I again, just kind of wrapping this thing up. I think hopefully at this point, people understand. And again, like there's a lot of research out there, so it can get a little confusing, and most people are not going to take the time to read through it, to digest it, to kind of analyze it, and again, given whatever their background is, it kind of understanding how these models or how the models are put together, and how the stuff actually gets published, and the reasons why. They'd much rather consume this in the Instagram post, which is what started this whole thing in the first place, because I thought, again, David and Lane did a very good job at kind of, they always do a very good job of kind of putting it into 3 or 4 slides or whatever, so you can get some valid takeaways, because I believe they're approaching this thing the same way we are, which is like, look, let's not overcomplicate this stuff. However, it's important, and I think this is the problem with the fitness industry, is it gets very oversimplified, and people want to put it into a nice little tight package because it's easily sellable or easily communicated. And while there is some value in being able to do that, I don't think very many people do that really well. And I think they recognize that they're not doing that really well. And so they're looking for the clickbait or the thing that gets them more attention and or likes, views, wherever it happens to be, or sells the thing that they have to sell. And if I would caution people, like if you're following somebody and you're buying into whatever it is that they're selling, take a look at how they're presenting that information and what the depth of that actually looks like. But so if they're trying to sell you that like there's this one optimal zone for anything, I think that's a red flag. There just isn't one. The research, all of the research supports that statement. Like there's just so much of it now, like it's not very consistent. What is consistent are some of the basics that we've covered here. So I think that's an important takeaway. I think, the other thing is there's this whole thing about effort and quality, right, of what you're doing. And so when you're going into, you look at training and whether you're lifting heavy, lifting light, lifting moderate, whatever it is, that this should be practice every time you go in. You're training, right? Not just going in and working out. You should be practicing everything that you do when you go in there. We talked about junk volume, we talked about junk reps, and those kind of things. Everything that you do should be very intentional. You'll get way more out of the quality and the effort that you put into that than you will out of worrying about, am I doing the appropriate amount of reps and sets here, right? Like, look, total reps and sets are important. Volume is important here, but how you're doing that gets way more important, and it's often very unsexy. It is very, very unsexy. There are no fancy exercises that build muscle, right, and build strength better than another one. The last thing I would say in terms of a takeaway is going back to kind of what we said or what I said at the top, which is marrying yourself to something and measuring your strength based on like 3 movements, right? Like it's the deadlift, the bench press, and the squat. Like, hey, if you're a power lifter, that shit's important, right? Like those are the things you got to do because that's what you're going to compete doing. And I'm not saying if you're not competing, those aren't things for you to chase. Like if that's what you want to do, or if that's what your client wants to do, they want to improve their 1RM squat, well, then you're going to need to practice and do the 1RM squat very well. I think perfect is the enemy of good. Whatever perfect means in terms of the perfect squat, which is a whole other discussion, right? But if that's what your client wants, then you need to be doing those things. But if what your client wants or what you want is to continue to build strength and muscle, marrying yourself to these exercises and rep and set schemes is probably doing yourself a disservice. Those are just kind of my takeaways here. And again, just like that was sort of a quick review of this research article that Schoenfeld wrote. But I think the bigger takeaway from all that research is like, look, people are saying things and they're latching on to things, and their entire business models and exercise programs and training schedules or whatever are dictated by these dogmas. And what this thing kind of scrapes back, or peels back the layers on is like, look, like there's value in some of the things that you're doing, but you're leaving maybe a lot on the table by not exploring these other things. All right. So last thing I want to say here is just like, hey, like that's a lot of information that we just gave you guys, or we just talked about. And it's typically always the case. We try to keep this stuff, try to condense it enough to where, a coach listening to this is going like, yep, that's smart information. And that's, how we should probably be communicating with the majority of the population that's out there. And somebody that is part of the majority of that population can listen to it and go, okay, well, that makes a little bit more sense to me, and maybe it gives me a little bit more direction to go down, or with regard to re-examining what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, or the program that I'm currently in, how to make maybe some adjustments to get a little bit more out of what I'm doing without completely upsetting the apple cart here and tossing that program out and hopping to another one. There is no perfect program. But that said, if you're one of those people that's like, I'd like to have this distilled down a little bit more for me. I want to talk to somebody that can take a look at the program that I'm on, that I can talk to, and I can talk to them about this. We can kind of dig through the detail to see how I might make those adjustments. Well, that's what we do, right? So you can reach out to us here. It's super easy. You can go to the website, rdftrainonline.com. You can hit us there. There's a contact page. Hit us up. We'll schedule an appointment. It's free, which is the best part about it for you. We'll chat for a few minutes and hopefully point you in the right direction. The other thing we can do is get you into a program with one of our coaches. Maybe it means more like a personalized, very specific program for you that we can work out. That's what we do here all day long, every single day, 365 days a year. Or maybe it's getting you into something like our Red Dot Fitness Strong or Red Dot Fitness Max program or a Fit for Action program.
Yeah. And I just want to end too, I want to say to the listeners, we definitely value your feedback. We definitely value when you guys reach out to us. I know Scott gets a lot of DMs. It does really encourage us, to know that you're listening. And if you see value in these episodes like this, we appreciate it when you share the content with others that would see value in this. And we definitely do appreciate the messages. It's very encouraging for us to kind of continue to get in here and try to share and be a positive light, like in this fitness industry that is so can get clouded often. And we want to, share our insight and share our experience to kind of help you guys. And I know Scott really appreciates it, and both Cece and I do too. So keep the messages up, keep the Spotify shares up, all that stuff. It's really encouraging for us, and we'll keep at it.
Word.